Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Wise Tech for Wise Money. The title today is The Turnaround Architect: 6 Decades of Building, Fixing, and Leading Global Enterprises. Today we're exploring how experience, networks, and success-based partnerships are reshaping global business in times of disruption. Before we dive in, I'd like to give you some context. I'm Gary Wayne, founder of A1 Solutions International. We help financial service firms navigate growth through AI compliance, strategic systems, marketing, and scaling. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Bill Thomson, managing partner of Mercana Growth Partners. Bill's career is extraordinary by any measure. CEO of multiple companies across IT, shipping, hospitality, gaming, and energy. A director of over 80 companies, with a third being public. And a man who built Canada's largest IT company and sold it to Reuters. Today he leads a network of 200 seasoned executives who don't consult. They partner on a success-only basis to transform businesses globally. Bill, it's really great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to have a man of your conjecture here, and this conversation will run for about 45 minutes. Is that okay with you?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, so thanks for joining me. What I'd love you to do is give us a bit of a view or overview on some of your journey. We'll go into more detail afterwards, but how you became an entrepreneur.
It starts by the fact that having finished my university education in business, I became a chartered accountant, and so I see things most of the time through a financial lens. I was probably not a bad accountant, but was very much more attracted to the finance side of the business, and ultimately helped one of our provinces in Canada deal with their industrial development strategy, where we were attracting companies, and ultimately I had to try to collect unpaid interest and rental bills. And then I moved more into the industrial side, having moved from Eastern Canada to Toronto. And organizing what we have today has not been something that happened overnight. Let's say it evolved. Basically left employment in about 1987 or so. And what you have today is not what was created in 87, but what has evolved.
That's fantastic. You mentioned you ran the Pan Asian Games in Sri Lanka, financing, planning, building, and operating. That's not a typical sort of a consulting engagement. Can you walk us through the approach and the complex and the multifaceted projects?
In fact, in that one, that was a failed project. We didn't do it, but the story is sort of interesting. 2 people from Sri Lanka came to my office and said, "We are holding the Pan Asian Games in Colombo," and I just forget what the modern name of Colombo is, and we need them financed, and the quantum is going to be about 500 million. I sent one of my fellows from Dubai and 2 of my fellows from Toronto for a week to Colombo to meet with the government officials and so forth. As a result of the discussions there, the project expanded, not just to include the financing, but you would say design, build, operate, finance, and then sell the resultant asset. So it became a very broad project. Now, first of all, we had to organize the let's call it the political direction from which we were to attack it. Because, as you know, when you do cross-border deals, you've got to know the right conduits from a tax and currency and so forth point of view to gain access. So I took some advice about that, but ultimately I approached the Canadian government and the British government for advice and assistance, and ran up against the fact that, if you like, internationally from a political point of view, people don't like Sri Lanka, mainly because of the conflicts that have existed there. And people like the World Bank and the other major financial institutions would not support them. Now, it took a fair amount of time and effort to meet various government officials, various senior banking officials, before I drew the conclusion that this was not going to be possible to be done from international sources. But certainly I had a group put together who could have done what we're talking about. Probably the way to qualify myself is that one of my associates runs a firm of architects which essentially ran the Pan American Games, which were held in Toronto about 10 years ago. So he was going to be one of the people here. It really involves one having, let's call it, a broad view, to be able to anticipate not only the legal, financial, and operational difficulties of doing it, but ensuring that you have the people around who can execute. But it's a good one to talk about the attitude that we had. We would take on something like that, and probably, if you like, it probably is it's a good example of the fact that we would employ as our advisors people like a variety of lawyers, a variety of accountants, a variety of architects, a variety of other people, consultants, the Pete Marwicks and of this world, who wouldn't do what we would do, because at the end of the day, our structure would have been that we would have been paid on contingency.
So it was under the Mercana model?
Yes.
Tell me, in the Mercana model, you said to me on our previous conversation that you have 200 associates. They're all over 50, with 25 years plus experience. How did you come to build that model? And it's quite different from most traditional consulting models. You said we don't compete for business, people come to us. What that creates is pull versus push dynamic. How do you get your projects? How do you operate? How did it come about?
The creation of Mercana, I've described it before as a kind of an evolution, was formed probably 20 odd years ago, after I had been quite active personally in operating a series of companies in turnaround mode. And those turnarounds involved a variety of industries, including IT and B.F. Goodrich and hotels and food and a whole bunch of things. In order for me to run those companies, and other people might take the task on as the chief restructuring officer, I always insisted on being the CEO, because I have never believed that a turnaround was limited to a financial turnaround. You had to have a very broad view when you're turning a company around. And as part of that, I would bring in subject experts to assist me, so that at the end of the day, I built up a network of people who had domain expertise in a variety of fields. Having created all of that stuff, as I say, about 20 years ago, I basically institutionalized it by saying, okay, let's collectively put something together here. So if I would have started with probably maybe 50 people, from that point on, we have attracted a variety of people to us. Perhaps it's a good idea if I told you what happened yesterday. We have a retiring partner from one of the larger law firms who has been on the street for about 35 years. I think he's just had his 60th birthday. He decided to sell what he had because he was primarily consulting into the healthcare industry as a financial person. And he had a chat with his wife, and his wife said to him, "I love you, but I don't want to see you at lunchtime." So, so, and that's very typical. I love you, but I don't want to see you at lunch.
I
So
can
go,
resonate.
go find something to do. So now somebody like him, uh, I will employ. We get many people just like that who have had a career. They're probably somewhere in their late 50s or early 60s, um, are dissatisfied with the career that they've run, perhaps have ambitions to run a company or live a more independent kind of existence. And so we will provide them that opportunity. Simple as that.
Do you have a rigorous interview process, or how do you decide upon who you want to work with? Sorry.
Well, it's quite easy actually, because as you can imagine, we require a lot of diversity, and we do a very, very minimal due diligence on the people that join us. The due diligence basically is satisfied by their success or failure in the first project we give them to do. And we'll watch them closely in that first project, and if they don't cope, uh, that means that they won't get a second project to do. But invariably what happens is this, that as with the gentleman yesterday, please send me your resume, and now I want you to respond to a questionnaire that we have, which essentially describes what you want to do. Not necessarily what you have done, but what you want to do, because with the career that you've had, if you've been on the street 25 or 30 years, you have a right to choose what you do rather than conforming to the tasks which you're qualified to do based on your education and experience. So tell us if you want to buy a company. Tell us if you want to run a company. Tell us if you want to travel. Tell us if you are prepared to take your compensation mainly on contingency. And we have a sort of an all-encompassing questionnaire. And then we enter all of that data on a database. And when I'm looking for somebody, it's quite easy for me to drill down and say, okay, I'm looking for somebody who has these qualifications, this experience, and these desires. Simple as that.
And how many guys succeed, like percentage-wise?
Well, what would I say? I would have said that success is not a fixed, it's hard to measure success on a fixed basis. Everybody succeeds, relatively speaking. It probably happens something like this. A couple of years ago, we were asked to run a potato chip factory in one of the provinces of Canada. And it had been established based on the fact that some farmers thought they were growing some really good potatoes and thought that they could make potato chips. And so they did, and they were pretty good potato chips. So they were failing, and another company here in Canada bought half of them, half of the ownership, and the thing was in trouble. So I sent one of my fellows in to basically look at the operational side and make improvements from the marketing and operational point of view. However, that wasn't the problem. The problem was the company's interface with both regulators and lenders and subsidizers and people like that. And the guy that I had in improving the operations and the manufacturing side did not have the capability to deal with the politicians the civil servants, the bankers, and so forth. So you could say that I made a mistake by choosing the wrong person to do it, but I had to support him. And so I had to put somebody else in behind him to deal with those kinds of issues. I mean, as you can imagine, if you're going to deal with a government minister, you got to be sure that the guy you're sending to meet the minister can wear a tie.
Sure. It's experience that counts, and the ability to adapt, and that's what I've noticed from your resume. I mean, what's interesting to me is you've done shipping finance in London, you ran a load of Howard Johnson hotels, casino in Vietnam. You know, you've diversified so easily, or so it seems on paper. How do you manage that? Because generally, you know, people, when they look at your CV or resume, and I'm talking about in normal walks of life, if you haven't got experience in their field, they discard you.
Well, I guess perhaps the common quality, and I'm not talking about self-aggrandizement here, but I'm a business guy, and business, if you like, is like osmosis. I mean, it's the same. They're the same business principles, notwithstanding what kind of industry you're in. And so, I would never hold myself out, for instance, as being an IT person or a shipping person or an energy person. I have a macro view of those industries, but in terms of being an operator within them, I am not that. I am a person that can supervise people who can operate or who can market. So I don't mean to, if you like, duck the situation, but I suppose the best way to say it is, if you're going to run a hotel chain, you don't necessarily know how to clean the rooms or run the reservations desk, but you have to understand things like how res systems work in the hotel business, the percentage of your hotel's revenue that comes from the res systems as opposed to the walk-in trade. You have to understand the importance of maintaining your quality standards so that you don't lose your sponsorship by the major chains. Withstanding the regular inspections, either financial or operational, that a hotel franchisor imposes. You understand those kinds of things rather than really knowing how to do it.
Sure. It's about how to run a business and what's key in each business.
Yeah.
You've had over 80 plus directorships, qualified as an audit committee chairman. What patterns do you see in companies that succeed versus fail?
Well, I suppose I think I'd probably, if I were going to make a generalization, when people start businesses, let's say in many cases they have stars in their eyes, and they say, we're going to be very successful here. It's important if you have stars in your eyes, and it's important if you have, a really good idea or a really good initiative or whatever, to run your company even at startup on the same basis as you would have it run when you are in full flight. And the reason for that is that there are disciplines required when you are in full flight that if you can employ when you are starting, you will not fail to pass things like due diligence when you're doing financing, when you're doing M&A activity, all of those sorts of things. And if you take a broad view when you start about putting in place the same sort of disciplines that you're going to have to use as you succeed, that probably is the most important thing. And an awful lot of professional firms are preoccupied in, if you like, ameliorating the deficiencies in firms which aspire to either finance or expand, and they lack the the fundamental disciplines and fundamental experience and filings and so forth in order to qualify for those things. And so there's a lot of corrective action required. So my single piece of advice is if you're going to rule the world from day one. Don't decide you're going to rule it halfway through.
Good advice. You've had a lot of experience with NASDAQ, TSX and other exchanges. What governance mistakes do you see growing companies repeatedly make?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's a broader situation today. I think one of the terribly interesting things that, just as a sort of statistic, one of the Americans did a study here a year or two ago, and it was terribly interesting. Relatively speaking, the biggest increases in director compensation have occurred and have hit the corporate governance side. So relatively speaking, we are paying more money to people on governance than we are on comp or audit or the other things that go into creating a board. And so it is an increasing reality in our society. And so if you said, what is the biggest deficiency today? It's probably that I think that people are being inundated with many, many new, first of all, regulations, and secondly, business practices, which require a level of internal regulation, internal discipline that have never been there before. I mean, the whole business about, and I'll sort of go off on a tangent here, the whole business of conflicts is a terribly interesting subject when you get down to it. And the extent to which you have boards which are dominated by the promoter or dominated by the owner there has to be let's call it a counter thrust. And the counter thrust that I believe in is directors must be independent. I think many of the rules have to do with ensuring that all directors are independent, even if they're appointed by the promoter or majority shareholder. And I've had lots of experiences, and I think a bunch of my friends have as well, where you find yourself appointed by your best friend Charlie down the street to be on his board, and Charlie says, well, Bill, you'll vote with me, won't you? Well, no, I'm going to vote the way that I think I should vote in the best interests of the broad constituency, being the broad group of stakeholders in your company. And while you may control, that doesn't necessarily mean that I will conform to all of the things that you think in or believe. So as a single item, that's probably the most important thing.
But how has that evolved over the last few years? Are we seeing more and more people acting that way? Or do you think that generally directors are still being held down by their friend Charlie?
I think, frankly, too many directors are being held down by their friend Charlie.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's it. And while I'm no friend of governments, certain of the regulations that are being put in place are to the benefit of all of us to ensure that there is, and it's not just governments, but it's let's call it the membership groups of, directors groups and other sort of institutes of CAs and law societies and things like that are putting rules in place which are, I'm more, if you like, on the British side, where you do things by precedent rather than making rules. And so to the extent that one has confidence, you know what the right thing is to do. You shouldn't have to look in a rule book and say, this is the right thing to do. We all of us, as we grow, and as we get older, you're supposed to know what to do. You know what's right and wrong. You don't have to
I
be
don't
told.
feel you say about the British, but I feel the British way of life is becoming more regulated, more like Big Brother looking over you all the time, less freedom. I don't know what it feels like in other countries, but our government regimes just seem to be getting worse. If from my point of view,
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree with you. Uh, However, my refuge in that one goes something like this. When I was in university, I had a university professor who said, in your lifetime, you know that things are going to move gradually towards the left. And that has happened. And it's not that it shouldn't have happened, but it does happen. So why have things moved more to the left? Well, because we become more socially conscious. We become more aware of the fact that there are disadvantaged people. Um, we can't be the crass capitalists that existed a century ago. We've got to ensure that there are rules and constraints in place to protect those people who are not in the same position as you and I might be. So we're moving to the left. And I think it's only a question of how fast we move. I mean, I'm obviously somebody who wants to be a slow mover because I, I'm an unabashed capitalist, but I would have said that I'm probably a more sensitive one, or
I
you
think it's
know,
good to be considerate of other people. But the practicalities, and I'm digressing a bit. There's more billionaires and multi-millionaires now than there's ever been, and the gap between ordinary people, as they're classified, to those with a lot of money is widened tremendously.
well,
And yet we're leaning to the left. It doesn't quite add up.
well. The other thing is that um, I don't know uh, who's getting rich these days. Too too many people are getting rich or prominent because of, funnily enough, appearance, physical appearance. And so you have politicians who are all fired up about, you know, how handsome they are or how good looking they are, whatever. And that's what generates support. I mean, we've had terrible experiences here in Canada about that, where competence, you don't think about competence, you think about whether or not the fellow looks good. And, you know, it's appalling from that point of view. And so who gets rich? There are people like that. The people who, if you like, if you believe in a meritocracy, and you are of an age, and so am I of an age, that at least there's some element in our being that says we believe in the fact that the cream should rise to the top, and the people who are the most competent should do the big jobs. You look at those people who are uh, moved either into senior positions in politics or in society or in business and say, competence? Are they competent? You know, probably a good way for me to describe it is, do you know any presidents of the bank, of a bank, who you would have work for you? Presidents of banks are politicians. Presidents of large corporations are politicians. What makes the difference to little gremlins like me is I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I make money for people and try to do well. I I have to be careful that I don't hire prominenti just because they're prominenti.
Your point about the cream rising to the top, it resonates with me because when I was a kid, I used to be a broker in the foreign exchange markets, and I got approached by another company to go and work with. More money, this and the other, and the guy said to me, "You're coming. There's no titles here. this is what you'll get. It's a very good deal. Da, 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 da. We've heard you're good at this, you're good at that, and we'll pay you X, Y, Z. And I said to him, well, where I am, I'm a manager. And he said, well, we do have people manage our teams, but we would never employ someone as a manager.
Hmm.
We'll employ you and we'll pay you very good money. And if you're good, like cream, you'll float to the top. And if you're rubbish, like rubbish, you'll float to the bottom.
Yeah.
And we'll judge you on that. Anyway, I never took the job. However, about 9 months later, the company I worked with got taken over. And I went back to the same guy and asked if the job opportunity was still open. And he said, the job opportunity is still open, but it's about 15 grand less. So I said, well, actually, I'd rather be a milkman. So I never took the job, and I went away and I told my wife, and she was beside herself. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, and the guy said, well, we thought about it and we like you, and you can have a job, same money, same situation, and if you're good, you'll float to the top.
Yeah.
And I was there for quite a while, so it's true. But what I'd say about that and about what you said, and you talked about politicians, is that cream does float to the top to a certain degree. And then all of a sudden, if you're not in the club, this is my experience, or you're not a politician, you get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't seem to go much further, even if you're talented.
Well, I think that's right. It probably, if you like, prompts me to say that one of the things that we do as well is that we will form boards. When you're forming a board, one of the things you do is you don't necessarily look for competence, because everybody's competent and nobody's not smart. So smart tends to be trivial. So as you look at the people that you want, you can almost do it functionally. What functions do we wish to fulfill on this board? Is this a company that's going to have to have major interfaces with people like governments or people like lenders, or is it something where it's extremely important to manage brands, or what are the critical elements in a company like this? And you fill the board with people who can meet those individual requirements. But then competence never ever really caused anybody, any board, just because they're competent to succeed. And it's not cynicism, but one of the things you've got to do is you've got to staff it with prominenti. And if you don't get the sort of sponsorship that you require in the various things that you want to do. I'll tell you a short story. A couple of years ago, we had somebody from Dubai come in and said, do you know what do they call it? April Spring was? This was 10 or 15 years ago, where there was an enormous amount of money in the Middle East looking for places to go. And an awful lot of it went to London or Zurich or Milan in the real estate business. So we came up with the idea that a lot of it should come to Canada because we've got reasonably stable economy, and or at least did have, and that it was a good play, not in development real estate properties, but just in existing buildings and so forth. So we put together an investment memorandum and said we'll raise, I think it was 250 million or so, and I sent my guys out to try to sell it to the wealth in and around Dubai, and we failed. And my guy came back and said, I failed. So I said, so why have you failed? He said, well, I'm going to show you something. He said, look at who you've got on your board. And I said, yeah, they're pretty smart, competent guys. He said, the problem is that these investors are smart enough to be able to Google them all. And they don't know any of them because none of them have any particular position. So you've got to replace your board. So what I did was I fired all of those characters and brought in the head of, well, first of all, I brought in the former Minister of Industry for Canada. I brought in the managing partner for our largest law firm. I brought in the chairman of a company called Brookfield, which is, you might have even heard of Brookfield
Yeah,
in
I've heard
the
of
UK.
Brookfield.
I forget, he made the national real estate firm and decorated the board that way. As a result of which, of decorating the board, we got the money. Were the fellows that I recruited more competent than the guys that I failed? No. But did they get the money? Yes. Simple as that.
You built you built Canada's largest IT company, sold
Yeah.
it to Reuters.
Yeah.
That incorporated Reuters in Canada. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, one of the little-known stories about Canada is that we really have always been very, very strong on the IT side. We've been very early developers. A very prominent Canadian that no one has ever heard of was involved with Enigma, and you know, he was one of the code breakers at Bletchley Park. And so we do have a bit of a history in some of our universities. And there were some fellows who started a firm back in the early 70s in the IT business, and they did pretty well. But they weren't making any money, and in the late 80s, they were losing money at about a rate of about $2 million a month. And so I got recruited to come in and run the company. Now, the industry was immature enough so that young people were coming out of university and were being given an opportunity to work in the IT field, which was really greenfield at that time because it was so immature and so forth. Well, these particular fellows had developed one or two things. They had one of the 3 packet switch networks in the world. Geisco had one, we had one, and IBM had one. Now, as perhaps you know, the packet switch network is the forerunner to the internet. And so in the 70s and 80s, this company had that. And using that, they developed both operating systems and applications, as well developed a data array in a variety of fields, which was the largest in the world. And so we had this great gem. The only difficulty is that they were all, I mean, everybody wrote their own code. There was no infrastructure within the firm. And everybody basically reported to the CEO. And you may well say, well, that's not so bad, except that I tell you that 1,000 people, 50 offices in 25 countries, and everybody felt that they reported to the CEO. Little bit of a problem. And so I went in and stopped the bleeding, and was approached by the fellows in St. Anne's Gate, you know where that is, who thought that they were running Reuters at the time, and I think they probably were. And we had a chat. And so we'd like to buy you. And I said, so what do you see in our company that attracts you? Because I was expecting that it was this, and you understand some of it. I don't want to use the jargon on you, but Reuters had a one-way communication system. And as you know, fundamental in the internet, it's interactive.
Sure.
In those years, Reuters only went one way. They broadcast. And so I said, is that what you want to buy? Well, not necessarily. And I said, so what is it? I mean, we've got broad arrays of data. We've got some terribly interesting applications which a lot of the banks are using. what do you want? Well, we can get code written cheaper in Canada than we can anywhere else in the world. So that's why we want to buy you. And highly, we had highly educated kids that had come out of university, and they were not paid as much as their international counterparts. And so I sold it to Reuters, and I stayed for 3 or 4 months. But as perhaps you can understand, I'm not somebody who would work well in a structure like that. So nice people, very smart people. The Reuters people were always pretty smart.
With your IT background and the so-called current AI revolution, what opportunities are you seeing at the moment that you think others might not?
Well, I have to say this. The advice I'd give is that people should have a very open mind. The opportunities being opened up with AI are so tremendous that I'm not sure that we can put a real wrapper on it and say, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. There are so many implications and so many applications that can be applied here that I think it's a wide open kind of opportunity. It's like the IT business was, let's say, in the 60s. And if you said, so what do I think is going to happen? I just don't know. I'm a little bit concerned about some of the corporate governance side and the difficulties and changes that are going to be required in governance to accommodate the reality of companies operating with this type of technology, which at this moment knows no bounds. But it's limitless, and I think I'd probably give you this kind of an analogy. As you can tell, I like little stories.
Yeah. Well, stories help explain things.
If you think about healthcare, to your parents, the doctor was law, and what the doctor said was the rule. And he essentially managed your parents' healthcare. Today, as you consider your own healthcare, you have a whole variety of service providers, only one of which is your physician. So if you're like most people, you might have a dietitian. You might have somebody who works out with you in the gym. You might have an alternative medicine person. You might, there's about 20 different subjects that to which you may have gained access. So the epiphany that happens when all of a sudden doctors said, we don't want to be the old type doctors. We want to do shifts from here on in. We want to work 9 to 5. The effect on you was to say, okay, I'm going to expand my horizon so that I have other professionals to whom I can gain access, and they will advise me about a variety of things which my doctor, I don't know about you, but if you take vitamins, you might go to a vitamin shop. You got all of these various things. I'd give that as the analogy. Probably the AI analogy is a much bigger one than the healthcare one, but the healthcare one in the last 20 years has gone through an enormous evolution. And it all comes back from, I repeat what I said before, to your parents, the person who managed their healthcare was their doctor. And now you do it yourself.
Yeah, it's true. You've turned around quite a lot of distressed companies. What's your framework for assessing an opportunity amongst scale?
Well, invariably, when I'm approached, when the approach sort of happens like this, normally an awful lot of times, funnily enough, it's a Wednesday. And the reason why it's a Wednesday is it's, Bill, it's Wednesday. We can't meet the payroll Friday. How can you help us? And invariably, it's like that. It's people cannot meet the payroll. And that's the sort of conduit in to these situations, invariably. And I think the reference that I made earlier to the fact that chief restructuring officers are only interested in reshuffling the deck in terms of how a company is financed. And I believe that you've got to be much more fundamental than that, that the, if you like, the mechanic which drives the company, the combination of the commercial strategy and the operational strategy, have got to be assessed and ensure that they work in such a way that at the end of the day you will have positive results. And so why are you in trouble, and why do you have no cash in the bank? It isn't because the controller forgot to deposit the money. It's because the engine isn't working, so you've got to fix the engine.
You've worked across many different countries and different business cultures. Do you find you have to adapt your mentality accordingly, or one general your general approach fits every culture?
Well, I want to answer that in a couple of different ways. First of all, let's start with China. Being the audit committee chair of Chinese companies does not imply in any way that I have any sort of flexibility. I do not. The people who take on those tasks and want to ensure that they are complementary to certain of the accounting practices employed in China, which are different than ours, are just going to get themselves in trouble, especially if those Chinese companies wish to list on Western exchanges. So you've got to be the person who says no, and you can't sort of say, well, we're all just one of the boys. I've always taken the attitude a little bit, and cross-culture, cross-language is hard for all of us. I mean, it really is hard for all of us. I am very sensitive about ensuring that I don't come across as what used to be called a carpetbagger. I don't want to go to Vietnam, or I don't want to go to China, or I don't want to go to the Czech Republic, I don't want to go to the UK and be identified, oh, here's some North American who thinks he's got the answer to everything. I'm probably, at least I try very hard, not to be too outspoken. I try to, an awful lot of it is social. You don't come in with a 2x4 and hit everybody. You try to understand and be somewhat sensitive. Now, it doesn't take away from the fact that you've got to take decisive actions on a pretty regular basis. But the whole idea of going into a foreign country, make friends before you do business. Don't do business just without making friends. Understand who they are. And if you have to compromise a little bit, I mean, I talk about some of my experiences in the Far East, but there are some of the experiences that I don't talk about. And the reason why I don't talk about it is that there are different social customs which you can't simply say, no, I'm not going to do that. It's like, how would you like to go into a Chinese boardroom and say, would all of you people stop smoking? Because I don't smoke. You can't do that. Or if you go out in the evening in Vietnam and you say, I don't drink, so please don't drink. You can't do that. You've got to ensure that you can be accepted as somebody who's not unlike them, but just you have a certain skill set.
That's good. You mentioned disruption and uncertainty in marketplaces good for people like you. What specific opportunities are you seeing now? Certainly the markets are quite uncertain. We're not sure with geopolitical situations where we're going. Do you see a lot of opportunity coming out of that, or is it narrowed opportunity?
Well, first of all, yes, I do see opportunity. And the reason why I do see opportunity is that gremlins like me don't thrive when it's stable. Gremlins like me thrive when it's unstable. So we're supposed to be able to cope and do whatever is required, notwithstanding what the circumstances are. And you will recall from your years in trading, you're supposed to make money whether or not the market goes up or goes down. You should be ambivalent as a trader. I don't mean to be as crass as that, because we all hope for sunny skies and bright things, but you've got to be able to cope. And it's a matter of having some confidence in acting. I mean, I think one of the biggest impediments that so many people have is a reluctance to act. Knowing what to do is pretty easy most of the time, and I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's how you do it. It's execution. It's not the what that's hard. It's the how. You know, those are the skills that you've got to learn. But yeah, things are unstable at the moment. In North America, we have an enormously unstable real estate market, and it's going to have to be cured. In Canada, the source of it is that we over-encouraged people to emigrate without having the infrastructure to support them. And so we now have enormous problems in the healthcare system and in the housing business to accommodate all the new people we have. But, you know, I think, and you in the UK, you're a little different, but you're somewhat the same. Canada doesn't thrive without immigration. We must have immigration.
No, we are the same. I mean, we can't fulfill a lot of roles and a lot of jobs and a lot of business situations without immigration. Since we left the EEC, we have struggled because we haven't got that free flow of talent.
Exactly, and you know, you're in the same position. It's in some ways, I drill down just a little bit further to say that our educational system is not turning out the skilled trades that are required to cope with our expanding economies. And how are we going to get those skilled trades? The only way, we have to complement our educational system by bringing in people from outside. And I mean, that's extremely important, but we have to be sure that the infrastructure is there to take care of them. And I think you probably know that Canada has a government-run healthcare system, not unlike yours. Yours might be better than ours, but we are a government-run healthcare system, and we are now very much overburdened.
Yeah, we're the same. I mean, we're struggling to get nurses and young doctors because we just don't have the flow of talent coming into the country. But moving on a little bit, your model relies on networks and partnerships rather than competition. How do you structure these relationships for mutual success? You also hire the big four when needed rather than competing with them. How does this collaborative approach change the outcomes?
Well, the first comment I'd make is I would say 90% of our assignments come from the associates. So every one of the associates is out there on his own, attempting to promote his own interests. And he will come upon situations where he will be challenged either what I call qualitatively or quantitatively. Either he will get too much to do, or they will ask him to do something that he's uncomfortable doing or not able to do. In which case, our structure encourages him to bring that client to us, and we will find a way to share the fees with the person who refers the client in. But I go back to the first comment to say that at least 90% of our new clients come from the associates. So now if I then take a step and say, now we employ the professionals. The whole idea that a professional firm would retain us, it doesn't happen very often. just a short anecdote. I remember 15, 20 years ago, I went to one of our large law firms and it said, I did some sums, and I had been responsible in the last 10 years in directing just under $20 million worth of legal fees to you. And I looked on the other side and said, how much have you referred to me? And I found one job where we made 25 grand. Do you see that there's anything wrong with that picture? And the answer was, no, we don't, Bill, because we serve you better than we serve anybody else anyway. And I said, well, we've got an awful lot of other people who want to try to serve me as well. Well, no, Bill, it violates the principle of the Law Society for us to pay referral fees or any of that kind of stuff. And I said, that doesn't work for me. So I will not show you favoritism. And so that is the issue. It's I won't show favoritism to any of those firms because it's not reciprocal. And if it isn't reciprocal, why should I favor them? There's, as you say, they're all smart. Nobody's smarter than anybody else. You go to people who are perceived to have a certain expertise. If you go back to the Sri Lanka situation, I can name the 2 international law firms and the 2 accounting firms that are the most experienced there. So I would naturally go to those guys. But that's the only criteria. And the other issue is, just so you don't miss the point, every one of the 200 associates has their own network of professionals.
So it's a huge array of talent. You don't obviously charge normal consultancy types fees. How does the success fee model work in practice?
But it works quite well. I mean, I think
You take a percentage of the upside or what you achieve.
it depends on the individual circumstances. We tailor it. We've done several deals where we do a year-over-year improvement in net cash flow. We'll normalize the baseline and take a percentage of the improvement. We'll take equity in the firm. We'll take options. We'll take a variety of things in the firm. Obviously, or not necessarily obviously, we're hoping for a longer-term relationship with them after the task is done. And so there's lots of those. I think it's sort of, and I suppose this is quite nice to say, if I look back and say, are there people who think that Mercana in some way or other was unethical or impractical or didn't do a good job? We don't have any people who think that we're bad people at all. And if we did, I'd fix it.
Okay, what sort of projects does Mercana look at today? What are you most interested in at the moment? Well, how can businesses know if they're ready for your success-based business model?
Well, it's hard to regularize that, but a young friend of mine who, funnily enough, is not an associate, but his family was an old client of mine. He came to me and he said, I work for a company now that, based on their business model, they're creating carbon credits, and we don't know what to do with them. So could you help us exploit the carbon credits that we're creating? So why would he come to us? Well, because, I mean, in order to do that, one has to have a certain broad perspective. You can't just know, what are they, how are they traded, where do you do it, who's interested, what's the play, and all that stuff. So something like that. Our newest client we signed yesterday runs an operation which provides housing for retired or let's call them senior people in the entertainment business. And they have a fairly large building, which I think has about 200 units in it, and they want to expand it to 500 units. Now it's a charity and gets money from several levels of government, um, but also has equity in the building that it's currently owning of about $100 million. So what do we do? How do we double the accommodation from 200 to 500? How do we use the money we have? How do we take advantage of the various charitable giving situations? Um, it's sort of typical. Don't get me wrong. It's a bit complex, but isn't that part of the fun? It's the fact that you're being mentally challenged to sort of say, well, how do you put this together? And so those are within the last 2 weeks, I guess. Um, those kinds.
It's good how adaptive you are, and you're like a chameleon.
Well, probably right.
Just, I knew this would be a long podcast, and it's the longest one I've held to date. So, and I could talk to you for the next 5 hours. There's so much I could learn from you. But before we wrap up, what advice would you give to, say, a 40-year-old executive today that you wish someone had told you when you were a younger man?
Well, I'm going to put it to you this way. When I was a young man starting out, and so were you, one of the critical elements in our employment was the mutual loyalty that existed between you and your employer. If you got employed by somebody, you were dedicated to that employer, and that employer was dedicated to you. Now, about 25 years ago, what happened was that the employer started it by saying, what we're going to try to do is to look functionally at what Gary is doing. And if we're paying Gary, let's say, 100 for doing that, can we get it done by somebody else for 75? And by the way, how much do we have to pay Gary to go away? And, let's work out the sums. And frankly, the employer side started it. And what they did was that they cut the cord of the loyalty of the employer to the employee. So now if I turn that around on a reciprocal basis, I think one of the things that it doesn't make any difference if you're 20, 30, or 40, what's the Socratic saying to thy own self be true? You are a talent, you have a capability. That's transferable to a variety of people. And you have to understand that if the situation that I've described is abroad in our society, if people are not going to be loyal to you, you must operate on the basis of not flying around and changing jobs and all that stuff, but making your contribution, doing as well as you can, being really sure to build up the resume that you've got by doing the right thing and, working hard and being successful and all of those things. But, keep your eyes open and your horizons broad because there are opportunities happening around you that you've got to be aware of, and sometimes you will wish to take advantage of. But I think in our lifetime, that's been one of the most important issues that's occurred in our employment scenario, is the elimination of mutual loyalty between employer and employee.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, really. I mean, probably the reason why we all ended up working for ourselves.
Bingo. Bingo.
I remember, I've worked for myself for over 20 years. I remember just losing confidence in being an employee, however high you were. And I mentioned to you earlier about it didn't matter about your talent at a certain stage. For me, in my experience, I found that if you weren't in the right club, then you just hit a brick wall,
Yeah.
even if you were making money and doing a great job. And then you became a kicking stone between the people under you and the politicians.
Exactly.
So you
Yep.
just had to get out.
Yeah.
Bill, it's been a remarkable chat. You've been around for a long time, thank God, and you'll be around for a lot longer. Your success has been brilliant, and I've really, really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, I too have enjoyed it. The only thing you haven't said, and I had this happen to me yesterday. I was in downtown Toronto in one of the buildings, and an old friend of mine walked up to me and said, "Bill, you look really good." Well, I hated that. I mean, what do you mean I looked really good? What, as opposed to what? You know, am I supposed to have deteriorated over time? I don't know. I took it as an insult.
I think you're like a fine wine, aren't we all? We
Yeah,
get better with age.
that's right.
So for our listeners who need your services or would even like to join you, where can they find you?
Well, we have a website, and it's mercanagrowthpartners.com. So just take a look, and all the contact stuff is there.
That's brilliant. Well, Bill, I'm sure we'll talk again. Don't go for a minute. I just want to say I'm Gary Wayne. Thank you very much for attending. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on my website, which is www.a1solutionsinternational.com. Thanks for listening to Wise Tech for Wise Money, and keep a lookout for the next episode.